Commander Taewon stood in the observation deck of the Galactic Council station. Watching the votes come in on the holographic display, his hands were steady, but inside, anger burned like a furnace. The council representatives from 14 different species were voting on Decree 4477, and Taewon already knew how it would end. He had spent 20 years serving as humanity's military liaison to the council, and he had learned to read the signs. The final vote appeared on the screen. Unanimous approval. Humanity would be restricted to only 3 star systems. All research stations beyond those boundaries had to be dismantled within 6 months. The official reason listed was resource conservation and maintaining galactic stability. Taewon knew the real reason. The other species were afraid of what humans might become if given freedom to grow. He turned away from the display and walked through the curved corridors of the station. Alien beings of various shapes and sizes moved past him, some on legs, others floating, a few slithering. None of them met his eyes. They knew what they had just done. Taewon entered his quarters and opened a secure communication channel to Earth. Admiral Jiwoo appeared on the screen. She was in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face carved from years of service. She commanded the entire human fleet, though that was not saying much. The council had made sure humanity's military remained small. "It passed it," Taewon said simply. Jiwoo's jaw tightened. "How long do we have?" 6 months to comply. After that, they'll enforce it themselves. Enforcement, Jiwoo repeated, her voice cold. "They mean they'll destroy our stations and arrest anyone who resists." Taewon nodded. He started to speak, but Jiwoo held up a hand. On her desk, a new message was coming through. She read it, and all color drained from her face. "What is it?" Taewon asked. "It's from Nova Sol Colony," Gu said quietly. "The council has been rerouting our supply ships. Thousands of colonists are stranded without food or medical supplies. They've been doing this for months." Tuan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "They're starving our people and calling it administrative delays," Gu finished. She looked directly at the camera. "Taewon, I need you to file a formal protest. Go through proper channels. But I want you to know something. I've been preparing for this day for a long time. If they don't fix this, if they keep pushing, there will be consequences." The call ended. Taewon sat in silence for a moment, then began drafting the protest. He knew it wouldn't matter, but he had to try. On Nova Sol, a frontier colony orbiting a yellow star 300 light-years from Earth. Minji was trying to explain to her daughter why there was no food for dinner. Dayun was only 8 years old, too young to understand the politics of galactic governance. Too young to know why the supply ships had stopped coming. "The ships are just late," Honey Minji said, holding her daughter close. "They'll come soon." Minji didn't believe her own words. She had heard the rumors. Other colonies were experiencing the same problems. The council was squeezing humanity, testing to see how much they could take. Minji was a colonist, not a soldier. But she had grown up on Earth during the Unity Wars. She remembered what humans did when pushed to. Far, she recorded a message to Earth, describing the situation, begging for help. She sent it through the colony's main transmitter, knowing the council would intercept it. She didn't care anymore. Her daughter was hungry, and that was all that mattered. The message reached Earth 3 days later. It was one of hundreds, all telling the same story. The United Earth Assembly convened an emergency session. The massive chamber in Geneva filled with representatives from every nation and colony. They had maintained unity for 200 years since joining the galactic community. That unity had never been more important. Ambassador Jaehoon walked to the central podium. He was 70 years old, a veteran diplomat who had spent his entire career building relationships with alien species. He had friends among the Velkrin, had negotiated treaties with the Horthians, had even learned to appreciate mechlologic poetry. He loved the galaxy and its diversity. But he also loved humanity. "We have tried peace," Jaehoon said, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "For 200 years we have followed their rules. We have accepted their restrictions. We have smiled while they treated us as children who needed supervision. We have been patient. We have been reasonable. We have been peaceful." He paused, letting the words sink in. Every representative in the chamber knew what was coming. And they have mistaken all of that for weakness, Jae-hoon continued. They have taken our patience for submission. They have taken our peace for fear. They are starving our children. They are destroying our future. They believe we will simply accept this because we have accepted everything else they have done to us. The chamber was silent. Jae-hoon looked around at the faces of humanity's leaders. I propose we show them what happens when humans stop being patient. I propose we show them what we really are. I propose we declare war on the Galactic Council. The vote took 3 hours. Representatives wanted to speak, to voice their concerns, to make sure everyone understood the magnitude of what they were doing. Humanity had 47 warships. The Council had 17,000. This was suicide by any logical calculation. But humans had never been good at accepting logical calculations when their children were starving. The vote was unanimous. Every single representative voted yes. The declaration was transmitted to the Galactic Council at 14 o'clock Geneva time. It was a simple document, written in clear language that left no room for misunderstanding. Humanity declared that the Galactic Council had violated the terms of their membership treaty. Through systematic oppression and deliberate harm to human colonies, humanity considered themselves at war with the Council and all member species until such time as reparations were made and restrictions lifted. On the Council station, Taewon watched as the declaration appeared on every screen simultaneously. Alarms began to sound. Council security rushed through the corridors. Alien representatives emerged from their chambers, confusion and disbelief on their faces. A Velcrin commander approached Taewon. The Velcrin were the Council's primary military force, tall beings with forearms and exoskeletons that gleamed like polished metal. This is a joke. Yes, the Velcrin asked. Humans cannot be serious about war. Taewon looked at the commander. He thought about Daeun and all the other children going hungry. He thought about the decades of restrictions and condescension. He thought about Admiral Gu and the preparation she had hinted at. We are completely serious, Taewon said. You wanted to see what humans are capable of when you push us too far. You're about to find out. The Velcrin commander laughed. It was a sound like grinding gears. You have 47 ships. We have thousands. This war will last a week. Taewon smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then I guess you should enjoy this week? It's going to be educational. He walked away, leaving the Velcrin commander standing in the corridor. Taewon had his orders. All human personnel were evacuating Council space immediately. Within 24 hours, every human diplomat, every human trader, every human scientist working in Council territory would be gone. The galaxy was about to learn an old Earth saying, "Don't mistake kindness for weakness." The war had begun. The news of humanity's declaration reached every corner of the galaxy within hours. On the pleasure world of Second 5, Council representatives gathered in luxury resorts to watch the announcement. Most of them were laughing. A few were placing bets on how long the human rebellion would last. Councillor Drexmal of the Horthian Collective was particularly amused. 3 days, he announced to the crowd. I give them 3 days before they surrender. Perhaps 4, if they're particularly stubborn. The Horthians were a proud species, known for their psychic abilities and their military victories. They had conquered 12 systems before joining the Council peacefully. The idea that humans, with their tiny fleet, could pose any real threat was absurd to them. Fleet Commander Thelvas, of the Velcrin Dominance, stood apart from the celebration. He was reviewing tactical data on a portable screen, his forearms moving quickly through reports. 47 human ships. That was the official count. They were scattered across 3 systems, mostly older models built under Council supervision. The Velcrin could deploy 3,000 ships within a week. This wasn't going to be a war. It was going to be pest control. Still, something bothered Thelvas. He had fought in 17 campaigns and crushed 6 rebellions. He had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him something was wrong. Humans had been too quiet for too long. They had accepted restrictions without serious protest for decades. Why declare war now? Why choose the exact moment when they appeared weakest? He filed a request for additional intelligence on human military capabilities. The response came back quickly. Human ships were slow. Human weapons were outdated. Human tactics were defensive and cautious. Everything suggested this would be an easy victory. Thelvis set aside his concerns and began planning the invasion of human space. On Earth, Admiral Jiwoo stood in the command center deep beneath the Himalayan mountains. The room was filled with screens showing every human ship, every colony, every asset they possessed. Officers moved quietly between stations, their faces serious and focused. This was the moment they had been preparing for. "Activate Protocol Cheongsu," Giwoo said quietly. The order went out across human space. In orbit around Earth, exploration vessels began to change. Outer hull panels slid away, revealing weapons batteries that had been hidden for years. Inside the ships, civilian quarters converted into military barracks. Cargo holds opened to release fighter craft that had been stored in pieces. Waiting for assembly, Captain Sung-ho commanded the ECS Indomitable. A ship that had been listed as an exploration vessel for the past 15 years, he had flown this ship on dozens of missions, mapping star systems, conducting research, always under the watchful eyes of Council observers. Those observers had never suspected what the ship really was. "All crew to battle stations," Sung-ho ordered. "Engineering, bring the real engines online. Weapons, you are free to hot." His crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this day in secret. Running drills disguised as maintenance exercises, practicing combat maneuvers that they had reported as navigation tests. Every member of his crew knew their role. The Indomitable's true engines came online, and suddenly the ship that had seemed slow and clunky could accelerate faster than most Council military vessels. The weapon systems that had been hidden behind false panels were some of the most advanced in known space. Humans had been developing military technology in secret facilities beyond Council monitoring for decades. Sung-ho received his orders. His target was a Velkran supply depot in the outer reaches, a facility that supported their fleet operations in 3 sectors. It was lightly defended because it was far from any conflict zone. The Velkran never imagined anyone would be bold enough to attack it. The Indomitable entered the system quietly, running silent with all non-essential systems powered down. Sung-ho brought his ship close to an asteroid field, using the rocks to mask their approach. When they were in position, he gave the order. "All weapons, open fire." Railguns that shouldn't exist on a human ship launched tungsten rods at incredible velocity. The supply depot's shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not kinetic impacts. The first salvo tore through their defenses like paper. Explosions rippled across the facility as fuel stores ignited. Secondary explosions destroyed docked ships and ammunition stockpiles. The entire attack lasted for minutes. By the time Velkran reinforcements arrived, the Indomitable was gone, vanished back into deep space. The supply depot was a burning ruin. Thousands of tons of supplies that would have supported Velkran operations for months were destroyed. Sung-ho transmitted his report back to Earth. Mission successful. 0 casualties. Enemy assets destroyed. Admiral Jiwoo received the report and allowed herself a small smile. It was beginning. Across human space, similar attacks were happening simultaneously. Captain Hannah, who had spent years pretending to be a simple merchant, revealed her cargo hauler to be a carrier for drone fighters. She struck at a Council communication relay, cutting off their ability to coordinate forces across 2 sectors. Engineer Donghan activated defense satellites that had been orbiting human colonies for years, disguised as mining equipment. When a Council patrol ship approached New Busan with orders to enforce the new restrictions, the satellites powered up and destroyed the ship before it could even raise shields. The Council's initial reports were confused and contradictory. Human ships were attacking from multiple directions. They were faster than intelligence had suggested. They were using weapons that violated technology restrictions. Most disturbing of all, they were winning. Thelvis received emergency orders to respond with force. He assembled 3 battle groups, 247 ships in total, and set course for New Busan. The colony had attacked a council vessel. It would serve as an example of what happened to humans who resisted the fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the New Busan system. Thelvas expected to see a small defense force, perhaps a few ships and orbital platforms. Instead, he saw what appeared to be empty space. His sensors detected the colony world and its stations, but no military presence. Advance to the colony, Thelvas ordered. Maintain combat formation. The Velcrin fleet moved forward. They were halfway to the colony when the first mine detonated. It wasn't a conventional mine. It had been floating in space for years, positioned by civilian ships during routine operations, powered down and invisible to standard sensors. When it detected the Velcrin fleet, it activated and began hunting the nearest target. Dozens of mines activated simultaneously. They were smart weapons, using simple AI to identify and pursue targets. The Velcrin shields flickered and failed under the unexpected assault. Ships scattered, breaking formation. That was when the railgun platforms opened fire. They had been hidden in the asteroid belt, looking exactly like mining stations. Now they revealed their true purpose. Tungsten rods traveling at incredible speeds slammed into Velcrin ships. The Council species had spent centuries perfecting energy shields, but they had no defense against simple kinetic weapons delivered with precision and overwhelming force. Thelvas tried to rally his fleet, but the humans had planned for that too. Small, fast human ships emerged from behind asteroids and moons, launching hit-and-run attacks. They didn't fight honorably in ship-to-ship combat as galactic doctrine demanded. They struck from unexpected angles, used the terrain to their advantage, and retreated before the Velcrin could respond. Commander Bora led the defense from the surface of New Busan. She coordinated ground-based weapons with orbital platforms and ship movements. Everything worked together in ways the Velcrin had never seen. Nothing fought alone. Every element supported every other element. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 247 Velcrin ships had been reduced to 31 survivors. Thelva's flagship was crippled, and he barely escaped with his life. The Battle of New Busan would be studied in military academies for generations. But right now, it was simply a disaster. The footage of the battle spread across the galaxy. Species that had been laughing at humanity's declaration stopped laughing. Military advisors began frantically reassessing their intelligence on human capabilities. Everything they thought they knew was wrong. On CCN-5, Counselor Drexmal stopped taking bets. The human rebellion wasn't going to end in 3 days. It might not end at all. Admiral Giwu watched the battle reports come in. Human forces were winning across multiple fronts. They had lost ships and people, but they were inflicting casualties at a rate that shocked even her. The galaxy was learning what happened when you gave humans 200 years to prepare for war while thinking they were being peaceful. She opened a channel to broadcast, across human space and beyond. She didn't threaten. She didn't boast. She simply stated facts. The Council thought they could limit us. They thought our patience meant weakness. They were wrong. We are a species that survived ice ages and plagues. We turned global warfare into an art form. We split the atom and touched the stars. They thought they could cage us with treaties. Now they know better. The broadcast ended. Jewal turned back to her screens. The war was just beginning. The Council convened an emergency session 3 days after the Battle of New Busan. The Grand Chamber on their homeworld was filled with representatives from 14 species, and for the first time in centuries, they were afraid. The holographic displays showed casualty reports, destroyed facilities, and disrupted supply lines. In less than a week of warfare, humanity had inflicted more damage than any rebellion in Council history. Counselor Vethrax of the scientific caste stood to address the assembly. She was a tall, thin being with 6 eyes and translucent skin. Her species had developed most of the technology the Council relied on. She had been reviewing human capabilities with growing alarm. "We made a fundamental error," Vethrax said. "We assumed humans were following our restrictions on military development. They were not. We have found evidence of hidden research facilities in deep space, stations we never knew existed. Humans have been developing weapons technology for decades, while pretending to comply with our treaties. The chamber erupted in angry voices. How had this happened? How had humans deceived them for so long? Vethrax raised her hand for silence. The answer is simple. We underestimated them. We saw a species that preferred diplomacy and assumed they were incapable of deception. We saw their patience and assumed they were weak. We never considered that they might be planning for the day when patience ended. Fleet Commander Thelvas limped into the chamber. His exoskeleton was damaged, one of his arms in a medical brace. He had barely survived the Battle of New Busan, and the experience had changed him. I have fought in 17 campaigns, Thelva said. I have never seen anything like human warfare. They don't follow galactic doctrine. They use every advantage, every trick, every deception. They turn entire star systems into weapons. They coordinate ground forces with space forces with a precision that should be impossible. And worst of all, they're faster than we are. Faster. Counselor Drexmel interrupted. Their ships were supposed to be slow. They lied, Thelva said simply. Everything we knew about human ships was based on them running at partial capacity. When they remove the restrictions, they're as fast as our best vessels. Maybe faster. The Council authorized a massive offensive. 6,000 warships from multiple species would coordinate an attack on human space. It was a force that had conquered empires. Surely it would be enough. The offensive began 2 weeks later. The Council called it Operation Final Peace. The plan was to overwhelm human defenses through sheer numbers. Occupy their colonies? And force surrender through occupation of Earth itself. The operation lasted 6 weeks and became known as the 6 Weeks of Blood. Captain Yenwu commanded a stealth task force of 7 human ships. They had infiltrated Horthian space using a captured Council identification beacon, making them appear as friendly vessels on Horthian sensors. The Horthians were proud of their psychic coordination network, a system that linked their fleet commanders in real-time battle awareness. It gave them an advantage in combat that had won them countless victories. Yan Wu's mission was to turn that advantage into a liability. His team's electronic warfare specialist, a young woman named Su Jin, had spent 3 years studying Horthian psychic networks. She had identified a weakness in their system. The network was powerful, but it relied on a specific frequency of psychic energy. If you could introduce the right kind of interference into that frequency, you could create a feedback loop. Sujin activated her equipment as the human ships approached a Horthian fleet group. The effect was immediate and devastating. Horthian commanders, linked through their psychic network, suddenly experienced simultaneous sensory overload. It was like 17 people screaming in your mind at once. The fleet coordination collapsed. Ships drifted aimlessly as their commanders tried to shut down the psychic connections. Yenwu's ships attacked while the Horthians were paralyzed. 17 battle groups were destroyed in detail, picked apart by precise human strikes. The Horthians never recovered. Their greatest strength had been weaponized against them. On the industrial world of Foundry Prime, the Meckler Collective was experiencing its own crisis. The Meckler were machine intelligences, artificial beings who served as the Council's primary manufacturing base. They built the ships, the weapons, the equipment that kept the Council war machine running. They believed themselves immune to biological deception. Engineer Chungmin proved them wrong. He had spent 15 years working with the Meckler as a liaison, helping to integrate human technology with theirs. During that time, he had installed backdoors in their systems, not obvious ones. The Meckler were too smart for that. Instead, Chongmin had hidden his code in routine updates, in minor patches, in the kind of small changes that happened every day in complex systems. Now he activated those backdoors. Production facilities that were building warships began building scrap instead. Assembly lines produced components that didn't fit together. Quality control systems approved defective products. The Meckler's vaunted efficiency became chaos. The Velkrin attempted one final strike. They sent their most powerful dreadnought, the Endless Reach. On a direct course for Earth, the ship was 3 kilometers long, armed with enough firepower to level continents. If it reached Earth, the war would be over. Pilot Kemsu led a squadron of human fighters to intercept. His ships were tiny compared to the dreadnought, fast and maneuverable but seemingly insignificant. The Velkrin expected the fighters to die in a futile gesture. Kung Dash-Su had other plans. He had studied the Endless Reaches design for years. He knew that Velkrin shipbuilding prioritized beauty and symmetry over practical durability. They built their ships to intimidate, to inspire awe. That meant they had structural weaknesses that a more utilitarian design wouldn't have. His squadron attacked in precise coordination. They didn't try to destroy the dreadnought with overwhelming force. Instead, they struck specific points on the hull, targeting structural junctions and power conduits. Each hit was carefully calculated to create cascading failures. The Endless Reach began to break apart not from massive damage, but from 1,000 small failures all happening at once. The ship that was supposed to end the war became a cloud of debris drifting through space. Kungsu transmitted a message to the Velkrin homeworld. You build your ships beautiful. We build ours to win. But the war was taking its toll on humanity as well. Despite their victories, humans were losing people. Ships were destroyed. Colonies were damaged. And the Council was preparing to send even more forces. New Busan fell to a second Velkrin assault. Commander Biora, who had orchestrated the legendary First Defense, stayed behind with a volunteer rearguard to buy time for civilian evacuation. Her last transmission became famous across human space. We knew what we were getting into. We knew the cost. Tell Earth we held the line. Tell them we made it expensive. The loss of New Busan ignited something primal in humanity. The war stopped being about politics or territory. It became existential. They were fighting for survival, and humans had a long history of doing terrible things when fighting for survival. On Earth, Dr. Yunji completed work on a weapon system that violated every galactic convention. Project Prometheus was designed to target stars, to turn them into weapons. It could make a sun go nova, destroying everything in the system. It was genocide in a box. Admiral Jiwoo looked at the specifications and felt sick. This weapon could end the war in days, but its use would make humanity into the monsters the Council had always feared they might be. Prepare it, Jiwoo ordered, but do not deploy. We keep this as a final option. The Council sent peace envoys, but they made a critical mistake. They came with terms of surrender for humanity. They still believed they could dictate terms from a position of strength. Colonel Tae-young received the envoys at a human outpost. He listened to their demands, then sent them back with a message. You don't get to start a war and then decide when it ends. You wanted to see what humans do when cornered. Keep watching. The 6 weeks of blood ended with the Council having lost 30% of its fleet. Human casualties were proportionally higher, but they kept fighting with a ferocity that terrified their enemies. Entire Council species were questioning why they were fighting a war that seemed to have no end in quiet corners of the galaxy. People were beginning to ask a dangerous question. What if the Council had been wrong? What if humans had been right to resist? What if the real threat to galactic peace wasn't human aggression, but Council arrogance? The war continued, but something had changed. The Council was no longer certain of victory, and humanity was no longer willing to accept anything less than complete recognition of their sovereignty. The galaxy burned, and everyone was beginning to wonder if it had all been worth it. Ambassador Jaehoon had not slept properly in weeks. His office on Earth was filled with reports from the front lines, casualty lists, and desperate pleas from both sides to end the war. He had spent his entire life building bridges between species, and now he was watching those bridges burn. The war had entered its 8th month. The galaxy was tearing itself apart. He stood at his window, looking out at the lights of Geneva below. The city was quiet, but he knew that across human space, families were mourning. Every day brought news of more deaths, more destruction. The Council had lost 30% of its fleet, but humanity's losses were proportionally higher. They were winning battles, but the question remained, at what cost? A message appeared on his terminal. It was flagged as urgent and came through a back channel he had established years ago with moderate elements in the council. Jae-hoon opened it and felt his blood run cold. The message was from Kelthor, a junior counselor from the Antarian Union. Kelthor had been one of the few who opposed the restrictions on humanity from the beginning. His message was brief and terrifying. The hardliners are planning to use planet killers against Earth. They believe only total destruction of your homeworld will end the war. You have perhaps 2 weeks before they implement this plan. I'm sorry, my friend. I tried to stop this. Jae-hoon immediately opened a secure channel to Admiral Ji-woo. Her face appeared on the screen, and he could see that she already knew something was wrong. They're going to try to destroy Earth, Jae-hoon said without preamble. Gi-woo's expression didn't change, but her eyes became harder. When? 2 weeks? Maybe less. Then we need to end this war in 2 weeks, Gi-woo said. One way or another, she explained protocol, Chaeyoung-su's final phase. If Earth fell, every human ship and colony would activate Phase Omega. It was total warfare with no thought of survival. Humanity would fight until there was nothing left, and they would take as much of the galaxy with them as they could. It was mutually assured destruction on a galactic scale. There has to be another way, Jae-hoon said. There is, Ji-woo replied, but it requires breaking every rule of warfare and diplomacy. Are you willing to do what's necessary? Jae-hoon looked at the lights of Geneva again. He thought about all the children like Dae-yoon who deserved to grow up in peace. He thought about the friends he had made among alien species. Good people who were suffering because of the decisions of arrogant leaders. Tell me what you need. Captain Woojin commanded the Spectre, humanity's most advanced stealth ship. It had inbuilt in secret at a facility beyond the Outer Rim, using technology that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The ship could hide from almost any sensor, could slip through defenses that should be impenetrable. Woojin had orders to do the impossible. He was to take the Spectre to the Council's home station, infiltrate it, and extract evidence of the crimes that had led to the war. The evidence existed. Jae-hoon's contacts had confirmed it. Recordings of council officials discussing the systematic oppression of humanity. Orders to starve colonies. Proof that the war had been manufactured deliberately. The mission was suicide. Everyone knew it. But Woojin had volunteered anyway. He brought the Spectre out of hyperspace at the edge of the council system. The home station orbited a blue giant star, a massive structure that housed the government of 14 species. Security was intense. Thousands of ships patrolled the area. Sensor nets covered every approach. Woojin activated the Spectre's full stealth systems and began the approach. His crew worked in silence, each person knowing that one mistake would mean death. The ship slipped past patrol routes, through sensor nets, past automated defenses. It took 6 hours to reach the station. The insertion team was led by Hae-jin, a veteran intelligence officer who had spent years operating in council space. She had studied the station's layout, identified the location where the evidence was stored, and planned 17 different routes in and out. The team deployed from the Spectre through a maintenance airlock. They moved through the station's service corridors, avoiding security patrols. Hae-jin led them deeper into the structure, toward the central archives where the council kept their most sensitive data. They found the evidence exactly where Jae-hoon's contact said it would be. Recordings, documents, orders, everything that proved the council's crimes against humanity. Hae-jin began copying the data to portable drives. That was when the alarms sounded. Someone had noticed the intrusion. Security forces were converging on their position. Hae-jin made a decision. She sent half her team back to the Spectre with the data while she and the others stayed to buy time. The firefight in the corridors of the council station was brief and brutal. Human weapons against council's security. The humans were outnumbered 10-1, but they fought with the desperation of people who knew what was at stake. Hae-jin took a blast to her shoulder, but kept firing. She watched her team members fall one by one. They held the corridor long enough for the data to reach the Spectre. That was all that mattered. Captain Woojin received the precious cargo and immediately began his escape. The Spectre's engines burned at full power as council ships gave chase. Wujin pushed his ship to its limits, using every trick he knew to evade pursuit. The ship took damage. Weapons fire scorched the hull. Systems failed. But the Spectre was fast, and Wujin was good. He made it to the hyperspace jump point with Council ships closing in from all sides. The Spectre vanished into hyperspace. Haijin and the others who had stayed behind were captured, but they had accomplished their mission. The evidence was safe. Ambassador. Jehun received the data and immediately began distributing it across every galactic network simultaneously. Humans had hidden quantum relay stations throughout the galaxy over the past decades, positioned during peaceful exploration missions. Now those relays activated, broadcasting the truth to every species in Council space. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the evidence played. Council officials laughing about human suffering, orders to deliberately strand colony ships. The casual cruelty, the arrogance, the contempt, it was all there. It's undeniable and damning. Public opinion shifted like a tide. Species that had been fighting humans began to question why. Citizens on Council worlds demanded answers from their governments. How had this been allowed to happen? Why had they been lied to about the reasons for war? Counselor Drexmal, who had bet on humanity's quick defeat, found himself facing calls for his resignation. Protests erupted on Horthian worlds. The Meckler Collective formally withdrew from Council military operations, stating that they would not support a war based on lies. Fleet Commander Thelvis, watching from his flagship, felt a strange mixture of relief and shame. Relief that the truth was finally known. Shame that he had participated in the oppression without questioning it. On Earth, Dr. Youngji made a decision. She accessed the systems controlling Project Prometheus and initiated a complete deletion of all data. The weapon that could destroy stars was erased before it could ever be used. She sent a message to Admiral Jiwoo. "We've proven we can win this war. Now we need to prove we can win the peace." The Council's political structure began to crumble. Member species demanded accountability. The hardliners who had pushed for the restrictions on humanity were forced to resign. New leaders emerged, ones who had opposed the war from the beginning. A formal peace offer arrived at Earth, transmitted directly to the United Earth Assembly. This time there were no demands for surrender, no conditions. Just a simple request. Can we talk about ending this? Jaehoon stood before the assembly once more. His hair had gone completely white during the war. He had aged a decade in 8 months. "You're ready to talk," he said. "Really talk. Not as superiors to inferiors, but as equals. The question is, are we ready to show mercy?" The debate lasted for hours. Some argued for continuing the war until the Council was completely destroyed. Others pointed out that humanity had achieved its goals. The restrictions were gone. The truth was known. Continuing to fight would only cost more lives. The vote was close, but ultimately humanity chose peace. Not because they were weak, not because they were afraid, but because they chose to be better than their worst instincts. Jaehoon was chosen to lead the peace negotiations. He insisted on one condition: the talks would take place in human space, on a human vessel. The symbolism was important. Humanity would not come begging for peace. They would grant it from a position of strength, the Council agreed. A new council was forming, purged of those who had started the war. They understood that the old order was dead. Something new had to be built. Admiral Jiwoo watched the preparations for the peace talks. Her fleet was still ready, still capable of fighting, but for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that the fighting might actually be over. On the ruins of New Busan, workers began construction of a memorial to Commander Biora and all those who had fallen defending the colony. The inscription would read in both human and galactic script: "They pushed us too far. We pushed back. May we never forget the cost." The war was ending. The hard part, building a real peace, was just beginning. The peace conference was held aboard Admiral Jiwoo's flagship, the Resilience, in orbit around Earth. The choice of location was deliberate and symbolic. For 200 years, humans had traveled to Council space to negotiate. Always as the junior partners, always as the ones seeking approval. Now the council came to them. Ambassador Jaehoon stood in the conference room, watching as the shuttle-carrying council representatives approached. He felt a mixture of emotions: relief that the war might finally end, anger at the cost that could have been avoided, hope that something better might emerge from the ashes. The council's new leadership entered the room. They were different from the officials Jaehoon had dealt with before. These were people who had opposed the restrictions on humanity, who had warned against the policies that led to war. Councillor Kelther, of the Antarian Union, led the delegation.
Oh.
The same person who had sent the warning about the Planet Killer plan. Ambassador Jaehoon Kelther said, bowing in the human fashion. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "Thank you for coming," Jaehoon replied. He gestured to the seats around the conference table. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." The negotiations took 3 weeks. Every issue had to be addressed. Reparations for the colonies that had been starved. Release of all human prisoners, including Hai-Jin and her team. Complete removal of all restrictions on human expansion and development. Most importantly, restructuring of the Galactic Council itself to prevent this from ever happening again. Jaehoon insisted on equal representation for humanity in all council decisions. No more would humans be treated as junior members. No more would their voice be dismissed. The council would become something new, something truly representative. There were difficult moments. Some council species resisted giving humans equal status. They argued that humanity was too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Jaehoon listened patiently, then reminded them what had happened when they tried to keep humans in their place. "We didn't want this war," he said during one heated discussion. "We tried peace for 200 years. We followed your rules. We accepted your restrictions. And when you pushed us too far, we showed you what we're capable of. Now we're showing you something harder. Mercy, cooperation, partnership. Not because you're stronger than us. We proved you're not. But because we choose to be better than our worst instincts." The words resonated. Even the hardest opponents began to soften. They realized that humanity wasn't demanding dominance. They were demanding respect. There was a difference. Commander Taewon attended the negotiations as a military advisor. He was. Cheat the proceedings with satisfaction. He had stood in the council chambers years ago and watched them vote to restrict humanity. Now he watched as they agreed to tear down those restrictions and build something better. On the 3rd week, the final treaty was drafted. The Galactic Council would be dissolved. In its place would be the Galactic Union, with all member species having equal representation. Decisions would require genuine consensus, not majority rule by the most powerful. Humans would have the same rights and freedoms as any other species. The treaty included provisions to help rebuild the colonies damaged in the war. Council species would contribute resources to restore what had been destroyed. It wasn't perfect restitution, but it was a start. Most importantly, the treaty included a truth and reconciliation process. What had happened would not be forgotten or buried. The galaxy would confront the truth about how the war started, why it was fought, and what it cost. Only by facing that truth could they prevent it from happening again. The signing ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy. Representatives from every species gathered in the conference room. One by one, they affixed their signatures to the treaty. When it was done, when the final name was added, the room erupted in applause. Jaehoon felt tears running down his face. It was over. The war was over. Admiral Jiwoo stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral, but he could see the relief in her eyes. They had won not just a military victory, but something more important. They had won recognition of humanity's place in the galaxy. Captain Sung-ho and the crew of the Indomitable attended the ceremony. They stood in their dress uniforms, representing all the human military personnel who had fought and died. Sung-ho thought about Commander Biora and the others who hadn't lived to see this day. He hoped they would be proud of what had been achieved. On Nova Sol, Minji watched the broadcast with her daughter Dayun. The colony had received its first supply shipment in months, just days before. Dayun was eating real food again, her face bright with health. The crisis that had sparked everything was finally over. "Is it really done, Mom?" Dayun asked. No more fighting? Yes, honey, Minji said, holding her daughter close. It's really done. The years that followed were not easy. Rebuilding took time. Trust had to be earned on both sides. There were still people in the galaxy who resented humanity, who believed they had gotten away with something by fighting back against oppression. There were humans who couldn't forgive what had been done to their colonies and families. But slowly, gradually, things improved. 5 years after the war, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. Human technology, no longer restricted by arbitrary rules, brought innovations that benefited all species. Medical advances developed during the war saved lives across the galaxy. New propulsion systems made travel faster and safer. Human military doctrine was studied in every galactic academy, not for conquest, but for defense. The tactics that had defeated the Council forces were adapted by species who wanted to protect their own worlds. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate the importance of innovation and adaptation. Captain Sung Ho, now an admiral, commanded joint task forces with officers from former enemy species. He trained with Velcrin commanders, shared strategies with Horthian tacticians, and learned from Meckler efficiency. The cooperation that had seemed impossible during the war became routine. Dayun grew up and became a diplomat herself. She worked in the new Galactic Union, building bridges between species, helping to ensure that the mistakes of the past wouldn't be repeated. Her generation, children who had lived through the war, were determined to create a better future. Dr. Yoonji continued her work in scientific research, but now she collaborated openly with alien scientists. Together, they pushed the boundaries of knowledge in peaceful directions. The weapons technology from the war was archived, kept as a reminder of what humanity could do if necessary, but never deployed. In the military archives on Earth, Protocol Cheongsu remained classified. New officers learned about it during their training, studied the preparations that had made human victory possible. It served as a reminder that humanity was capable of both great violence and great restraint, and that wisdom meant knowing when each was necessary. The memorial on New Busan became a pilgrimage site. Humans and aliens alike visited to pay their respects to Commander Biora and those who fell defending the colony. The inscription was expanded to include the names of all who died in the war from every species. It became a place of reflection and reconciliation. Ambassador Jae-hoon retired from active diplomacy, but remained an advisor to the Galactic Union. He wrote extensively about the war and the peace that followed. His central message was simple. Conflicts arise from a failure to see others as equals. The war happened because the Council saw humans as inferiors. Peace became possible when that changed. Admiral Ji Woo also retired, passing command to younger officers who had grown up knowing both war and peace. She spent her final years teaching at the military academy, ensuring that future generations understood both the necessity of being prepared for war and the importance of exhausting every option for peace first. The galaxy learned its lesson, though the price was high. Humanity would tolerate much in the name of peace. They were patient, reasonable, and preferred cooperation to conflict. But when pushed beyond endurance, when their children were threatened, when their very existence was challenged, they became something else entirely. They became the storm that no force could withstand. The key to coexistence was simple: treat them as equals, and they would show you the best of what they could be. Treat them as inferiors, and you would discover what 200,000 years of evolutionary warfare had created. 10 years after the war, on the anniversary of the peace treaty, representatives from across the galaxy gathered once more. This time it was a celebration, not a negotiation. Species that had been enemies were now partners. The scars of war remained, but they were healing. Counselor Kelthor, now one of the senior members of the Galactic Union, gave a speech that was remembered for generations. "We learned something terrible and wonderful during the war," he said. "We learned that humans are capable of extraordinary violence when necessary. But more importantly, we learned that they're capable of extraordinary mercy when given the choice. They could have destroyed us. Instead, they taught us to be better. That is the real victory, and it belongs to all of us. The galaxy had been forced to evolve. The old hierarchies, the old assumptions, the old prejudices were gone. In their place was something new, a genuine community of equals, bound not by fear or dominance, but by mutual respect. Humanity had declared war on the galaxy, and in doing so, they had saved it. Not through conquest, but through forcing everyone to confront the truth, that real strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know and not to. The war that should never have happened became the catalyst for a peace that might actually last. And the galaxy finally understood that humans were not just another species to be managed. They were partners in building something better. The story ended not with dominance or submission, but with understanding. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.